I have dated many women, and sometimes I tend to be something of a caregiving person. I'm not diagnosed with any dependency disorders or anything like that, but I do tend to lean in that direction. A white knight syndrome kind of leaning, or however you want to call it. My tendency in the past has been to pick people who really needed me in an attempt to hope that in appreciating that they would appreciate me and that they would come to care about me. That doesn't really work. Part of the reason that doesn't work is because people don't like to be helped unless they're asking for help. And that's been a hard thing for me to learn. I wish someone would have helped me, even though I didn't know how to ask for it when I was growing up. I grew up in a way where I didn't know options. I didn't know that there were ways that other people could live that were better, and I wished someone would rescue me. I wished someone would help me. And so I always think it's a very loving thing for me to try to be there for people and help them. But in reality, there are people who didn't grow up the way I grew up, and when you don't grow up in a constant state of non-stop fear and desperation, you have a more normal set of boundaries and a more healthier outlook on things. And sometimes you just need to vent emotions and you're not looking for a fix. And someone offering to help you fix something can be offensive. I've had girlfriends before who would come to full-on resent the way that I expressed being loving because they didn't want to feel vulnerable. They didn't want to be reminded that they had ever been vulnerable. They didn't want to be reminded that they had ever needed help. They viewed that as insinuating that they weren't strong. They were basically disgusted with the concept that they would even need an offer of help. And so it made them love me less instead of care about me more. There's this very difficult hurdle that I had to overcome. I had to get the concept that sometimes things are wrong and a solution isn't necessarily what's being looked for. When I was growing up, there had to be a solution. If there wasn't a solution, sometimes it was outright full-blown risk and danger. If there wasn't a solution found to a problem, it could be life-threatening. It could be very, very dangerous and not good. And in quote-unquote more normalized life, if something is going wrong, it doesn't necessarily mean the end of the world. It just means some upset feelings are being had at the moment. When I was growing up, when something felt bad, it usually meant something was bad and needed to change. Something had to be done. When people feel bad in quote-unquote more normal situations, it's just a symptom. It's just an alert. Feeling sad or feeling needy or feeling bad doesn't necessarily carry the same kind of a weight. And those feelings are just feelings, and they're just temporary, and then they'll pass, and then the person will move on. It was an extremely huge thing for me to try to start overcoming this kind of an understanding, because I grew up with such a different perspective on the world than the women that I was dating. And the women that I was dating, they viewed it so much as an insult that they would insult me, and they would treat me not very nicely because they were trying to reestablish a sense of power. And I wasn't intentionally trying to take power away from them. I was just trying to make everything feel safe and secure, and trying to make them feel safe and secure. But they didn't feel unsafe, they just felt crappy. And it was very hard for me to understand that those two things didn't have to correlate. You can feel crappy without being unsafe. And that's not something I grew up understanding at all. Sometimes people just need to feel what they're feeling, and they're just looking for someone to talk to about it. I've had to get to the point where when people are talking and they are talking about being upset, especially women when they are talking and being upset, because the perpetuator of most of the abuse when I was growing up was a female. It was my birth mother did most of the abusing when I was growing up. So I'm extremely aware of when a woman around me is not happy. I am very conscious of it. And that's partially because of it was a safety requirement when I was growing up. And so I have to recognize when this person's talking, am I feeling like in danger because this person's upset? I need to calm myself down so that I can be calm and just sit in the mud with this person while they're going through stuff. They're having a hard time, they're just wanting space. And when I've thought about it like that, it's made it easier to overcome this hurdle, because as much as I'm always looking to try to make sure this never happens again in the future, in reality, I have struggled my entire life with feeling like I'm allowed to exist and that I'm allowed to take up space, that I shouldn't be trying to make myself as small as possible. Again, because of how I grew up, probably. Recognizing that someone is having a feeling, and that feeling doesn't necessarily mean warning, Will Robinson, danger, you know, it means they just want to take up space for a little bit. They just want to feel like they're allowed to exist, even if the thing that they're feeling isn't necessarily happy, or isn't necessarily peaceful, or isn't necessarily fulfilled, or whatever positive emotion you want to put there. Negative emotions aren't bad, they're just there. They're just part of a spectrum. And it has taken most of my adulthood to get to the point where I could tolerate that. Not even just accept it, but be able to be in the presence of someone who's experiencing that and not be somewhat triggered myself, because I do unfortunately have PTSD. And so it's really a significant thing when someone asks for help. It's like a very precious thing. They're reaching out to you. They're accepting their own vulnerability. So when you offer to help and they didn't want help, it's like their hands being slapped when maybe they were considering offering you a precious thing, but now they're definitely not going to. The precious thing is now off the table. And sometimes if you just sit with someone, they'll get to a point of asking for help, and sometimes they never do. But it's really important to just let them exist. And if you do, if you just confront the thing and deal with it, it usually is like 5-10 minutes and then it's done. And then they can go about the rest of their day. And you can go about the rest of your day. But if you're trying to fix it and you're trying to basically offer solutions and stuff, then it just makes it prolong. It makes it last longer, and it makes them have to think too hard about it, and then they get all up in their head and they feel frustrated on top of whatever else they were feeling. Sometimes people have like really explosive reactions and emotions, and I'm not talking about those times. If a person's outright having an experience that is not proportional to the reality of the situation, I'm not saying, oh, this person, you know, you accidentally dropped something and now they're like screaming at you. I'm not saying sit with them in that. I'm talking about if a person's maybe had a hard day at work and they come home and they're wanting to complain about the situation at work. My original go-to would be, hey, here's some options for what to do next time if that happens. And they don't care. They don't want to hear that. That's not important. All they really care about is that they felt small in that situation. And right now, talking to you, they don't feel small because you're listening. That's really all it comes down to. It's just them recentering themselves and having a sense of authority and autonomy with themselves. and they're just venting. And so it's really hard sometimes to know if a person wants help, if they're hinting that they want help or not. So I'll just ask, so do you want help? Like, do you want a suggestion? I ask. I flat out ask, because usually they're pretty honest. Like, if you've already been listening. Now, if they come in and they're obviously upset and you're like, how's your day? And they're like, fine. If you ask, hey, do you want help? They're probably gonna be like, no, it's fine. Like, they're already pushing. But if they come in and they're like, today sucked, and you just listen, after a while, if you ask, hey, do you want any suggestions? They may say, yeah, sure. Sure, what, you know what? Because they feel heard after a while. It's important to make people feel validated. And that's something I'm trying very hard to work on, because this has been a thing that's been very hard for me to grasp for a lot of my life. It's just been a hard concept for me. I don't want to insinuate that someone's broken. I don't want to insinuate that someone can't handle it themselves. I'm never ever trying to do that. But it comes across that way anyway, and so I've had to change my behavior, because part of my behavior is a genuinely caring thing, and part of my behavior is just a continued habit from when I was little. And I've had to recognize that some of it is stuff that might have helped me when I was young, but doesn't help me now. You can really, really validate someone by just accepting them for a bit while they talk. And it can de-escalate their own emotions, which could help, for a person who struggles to regulate their emotions, things to be more calm. In the long run, overcoming that initial knee-jerk, oh no, this person's upset, I need to do something to make them not upset. If you can overcome that initial urge, then they can actually calm down on their own, and it requires less of your own effort and your own draining of your own emotional stamina to try to help overcome the situation. Sometimes being there for someone doesn't require anything more than paying attention, than active listening. It's important to be there for someone because we're tribal species. We get a dose of oxytocin, and we get a hormone that makes us feel good when we are there for each other, when we listen to each other, when we have interactions with each other. We are building together, we are creating together, we are loving each other, and expressing that causes good, happy hormones to come rushing in. And so it's not just even an emotional thing, you get a physical thing that helps to alleviate the emotional distress. If a person is in distress, they can have high hormones of cortisol in their system, and that doesn't help anything. Whereas they can come down and they can feel better from good hormones coming into their system. And some hormones can be influenced by things like your diet or, you know, your sex life, and things like that can affect certain hormones for sure, but just healthy and helpful communication with each other also affects hormones in each other's bodies. It's really, really important to understand. It's easier for me to understand because I know how my body reacts when someone around me is upset, especially if it's a woman. If they're upset around me, my body reacts. So it help make more sense to me going through understanding this and getting over the hurdle of it, that if I can have a physical reaction to someone else's emotional state, that they also can have a physical reaction to mine. If I can stay calm, and if I can be attentive, and if I can be accepting, they can have a physical reaction to that. Just like I get a negative physical reaction, they can have a positive physical reaction. It goes both ways. it's really important as part of our health as a species to know that we can serve each other. And I don't mean being someone's slave or being someone's, indentured servant. I don't mean being abused. I mean genuinely serving each other and caring about each other. When you give of yourself to someone else without compromising yourself, it's actually a very healthy thing, and it can add not just good hormones to your system, which is yay by itself, and not just create healthier relationships, which is good by itself too, but also give a sense of fulfillment and add a sense of worth and validation, not just to the other person, but to you, the person doing the giving. So it's really important to accept that we react to things in different ways and try to show people grace and understanding and forgiveness and patience, because almost all of people's overreactions to things, in my experience, are basically just maladaptive behaviors from our childhoods. Places where we did not learn to regulate ourselves correctly, we didn't learn how to handle a certain type of emotion or handle a certain type of insecurity, and we didn't gain a good understanding of how to execute in a healthy way a regulation of our systems. Most people who have really strong reactions to things, they're having a strong reaction not because of the thing, but because of some sort of habit that's left over from childhood. And if you can approach people with that kind of understanding, it can help you be more patient with them, and it can help you to listen. And you don't have to agree with what they're saying, and you don't have to fix anything. Just the act of listening by itself, just the act of accepting that they take up space, making it feel like they're allowed to exist, can do wonders. It really, really can. And I'm not perfect at it myself, so if you don't always get it right, show yourself some grace, some patience, some understanding as well. Okay? We're all learning. We're all trying.